Testament from Acts 2. But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them. Men of Judea, and all who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen to what I say. Indeed, these are not drunk, as you suppose, for it is only 9 o'clock in the morning. No, this is what was spoken through the prophet Joel. In the last days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh. And your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even upon my slaves, both men and women, in those days I will pour out my Spirit, and they will prophesy. And I will show portents in the heaven above, and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and smoky mist. The sun shall turn to darkness, and the moon to blood, before coming of the Lord's great and glorious day. Then everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. The word of our Lord.
Thank you, Rick. Woo. Greetings today from Hoppy, our area minister. I want to include that as I begin. My mic was acting funny. Let me see if I got it right. Charlotte called me yesterday and told me that she would be elsewhere, either in Texas or in New Mexico, somewhere in this great big region. But she wanted you to know and wanted me to know that I could tell you today that she is with us today in spirit. She remembers where we are today. It's not a small thing. It's not a small thing. Statistics say that most new churches are getting into their first facility at about 10 years, and that doesn't mean they're paying it off. It means they're getting into their first facility. They've been nesting or renting for the first 10 years. Statistics say that if you make it past the first year, you may not make it past 4 years. And here we are 12 years later, and we are in a newly remodeled, you can say that, newly remodeled facility that is completely paid for. We're very, very far ahead of the curve. Matter of fact, I think we've almost caught up with ourselves. Sometimes being ahead of the curve has been a challenge. It really has. There's been so many blessings, but with blessing comes challenge and responsibility. I want to remember things today, like when we're singing I Know the Plans. That's a song that I call indigenous here because I don't think you can hear it anywhere else in Abilene. I don't know who wrote it. I don't know where it came from, but I know that Sean and I heard it in a group. It was an African-American group that led worship at kickoff thing that Sean and I went to in Indianapolis in the fall of 2001. And at the time that we went, this congregation was meeting here on Sunday nights once a month. We were renters, and we had this much of the congregation, and it was all wooden pews, this much of the room over here, and then the south side of the room was all classroom space, partitioned off with PVC pipe and plywood. And so we'd been meeting once a month on Sunday nights to worship, and we'd been trying to organize home Bible study groups through the week. And Sean and I went to the fall kickoff together. Sean went because he was taking guitar lessons from me, and he had had some really great discussions with me about my call to ministry. Sean was one of the people, and I think I've told you this, but if I haven't, gosh, I should have. But you were one of the people who helped me discern my call to ministry. So I blame you for that. And that's a good thing because it's changed my life. I mean, I can't tell you. It's not about me. I'm not going to talk about that. It's changed my life. But Sean went because he said, you're going to go by yourself. I know you are, and I won't fly. I hate flying. My arms get tired. So they really do because I'm white-knuckled in the airplane like this all the way. And so he said, I know you're going to try to drive this 18-hour drive. And I thought, well, yeah, that's nothing. I do that a lot, 2 cups of coffee, I'm there, baby. He said, I can't let you go alone. So he went with me just to keep me company for this week-long thing. It was there that some things happened to him. For instance, one night, this is not a race thing, but, there's all these groups. Disciple. If you've never been to a disciple new church thing, it's exciting, man, because, there's like 7 languages going on in the room. And like at least 3 of them, you can't discern. It's just tongues, man. And so we were there one night when it just broke out, and it's like there were groups of people in each corner of the room crying and weeping, and there were people speaking in tongues, and I was up there playing guitar, watching this piano player just to keep my place, and I thought, oh my gosh, I wonder where Sean is. I brought this young Baptist boy with me up here, and I don't know what's happening. And so finally, when the music stopped, but the tongues kept going, and the room was full of crying and chatter, and I went looking, and about 5 or 6 rows back, almost underneath the pew, I saw Sean laying on the floor like he had rolled up under the pew. I never figured out if he was hiding or if he was slain in the spirit, but it wasn't long after that, or maybe a little before that, that people started coming up to him and asking him, "So you're the associate pastor at this church, right?" And he kept saying, No, I just came for the trip. But sure enough, when he came back, he was the associate pastor. We were the two loose cannons. We were told that when you went to Indianapolis, you were good. You had vision and you knew what you were doing. And boy, since you've come back, you're loose cannons. But we came back with the idea that we needed to start meeting on Sunday mornings. And that was in November. So by the end of December, the very last Sunday of the year in 2001, we started meeting on Sunday mornings here. And the only 2 times we've not been here on Sunday morning have been the 2 times we worshiped at First Church and at Brook Hollow. Even on snow days, I've told you, don't ask me to call it off. I'm the biggest employee here. I'm not even authorized to cancel a service. I'm supposed to be here. I've always been a dreamer. Dreams are not ridiculous for me. I dream big dreams. When I was 5 years old, I clearly understood I was going to be a musician when I grew up, and I didn't think there was any boundaries on what I could accomplish. I turned down 4 scholarships to college right out of high school because I saw myself touring the nation and touring the world with a rock and roll band. And I thought that the music industry was probably the hardest industry to crack and to break into of anything in the whole world. And I thought that was an even bigger challenge and made me all the more determined to do it. I know about dreams. I dreamed of being the drum major at Everett High School in Maryville, Tennessee, and then after my sophomore year, my parents moved me to Texas, and I was enrolled at Merkel High School. And so I simply just said, okay, well, if I can't accomplish my dream of being the drum major at Everett, I'll be the drum major at Merkel. And it sure enough happened. I dreamed dreams. I dreamed dreams. I dreamed of owning a music store and a recording studio one time. So in 1997, I'd been traveling up and down the road with a rock and roll band for a number of years. And I came home. And I bought a music store and I bought a recording studio. And then the pastor from my home church came to see me at First Christian Church. His name was Jim Zugg, and he said, "Hi, I'm your pastor." And I said, "Yeah, I've heard about you." I don't think I'd ever heard him preach. I hadn't been to church in a while. You see, I was gone on Sundays. But he said, "We're trying to start a contemporary worship service, and we need to put together a band. And it occurs to me that you and your friends would be a great help." And so Steve Couch and Billy McKee and I were all members of the band, and we were also members of First Christian Church. So we took our gifts and we took our talents up to the rehearsals where they were trying to organize a contemporary worship service. And here's what I said to myself: I'm going to sit in the back and I'm going to play guitar. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to lead anything. I'm not going to sing anything. I'm not going to pray out loud. I am not a model Christian, but I'm going to go help my church do what I can do. So there I was sitting in the back when the whole thing just sort of dissolved, and they said, "Well, it's dissolving because we don't have good leadership." So I went to another meeting and I said, "Well, I can rehearse your team. I'm a professional at that, and I can get your musicians ready. But I've been to praise and worship events, and I know there's this person who is called the praise leader, and that's not me, unless you know something I don't know." Boy, someone knew something I didn't know. You see, you're doing it too. I mean, wherever God says, "I'm going to lead you somewhere new," you first go, no. Like Moses, I have a speech impediment. Grab my brother, okay? And God is patient. God smiles, laughs. I like the way that Nadia Bolts-Weber says, "He just picked me up, held me up while I kicked and protested, and said, 'Isn't that adorable?' and then plunked me back down." So in a short time, I became the praise and worship leader. And in January of 2000, I found myself involved in a praise and worship service as the leader. I mean, I was doing everything. It was a 4-minute sermon, the call to communion, organizing the songs. Pretty soon, they even gave me $100 a week and put me on staff and gave me a title. Man, my name was in the bulletin at First Christian Church. I'm the Director of Contemporary Worship. Wow. Young men dream dreams. Joel was kind of flipped out. Young men dream dreams. Old men have vision. Peter borrowed that text for the sermon in Acts when the new church was being birthed, and I think there's a reason, because when this new church became a vision that was going to happen, it wasn't because a young guy like me dreamed a dream. It's because a guy much older than me, named Paul Graham, let the church and let the world know that he wasn't through dreaming yet. Now, Paul was old enough at that time to retire and spend the rest of his days worshiping in a comfortable place like First Christian Church with people that he knew, loved, and people that loved him and admired him, but he had a dream. He had a dream to plant a church on the south side of Abilene, and I might say this. He had a dream to plant a church in memory of his wife, D'Alva, of 50 years. You see, we don't know Paul and D'Alva here. We know Paul and Sarah because they have been an enormous part of our life. And what a great story. Paul Graham was married for 50 years, and he and Sarah now been married for how many years, Sarah? 15 years. Wow. Paul's what you call a 2-time winner, you know. He's just, boy, he's good. Go ahead. Don't leave anybody out. So Paul went to see, and if I get this wrong, Paul, forgive me. Don't correct me. That's the way I like to remember the story. But I think he went to see Chris Diebel, who was a retired pastor from First Christian Church for 30 years, possibly. And then Tom Lyda, who was the pastor there, got on board. And they went to see Ralph Glenn, who was a regional minister in Fort Worth, at our offices there to find out what needed to be done. Paul had some land out here on 707 that he wanted to give to start the new church. So they started there with guidance, and I think Ralph Glenn pretty much sent them home to organize a committee of people. Most of the members of that first steering committee came from First Christian Church, and that's when they asked me. Mike McDonald was on that team, and he was a big proponent of contemporary worship, and he and his wife were supporters of the contemporary worship service that I was director of at First Christian, and they asked me to be on that team because they knew that the new church in Wiley needed to be a contemporary church. Those were the congregations that were growing. And so I got asked to be involved. You know, what amazed me, and I'm going to tell you this, we had several people on the committee that came and went. Some were pastors, some were lay people. Some were people who wanted to be the pastor of this church, and they came and they stayed long enough to find out that that wasn't happening overnight, and then they left. But I remember one day when they said, you need to be talking to your friends who don't go to church. And I asked everybody on the committee, do any of you have friends who don't go to church? And nobody there, no, we don't, really. And I said, well, okay. So in my mind, I thought, this is going to fall to me. I'm going to have to go do this. So I went out and I put together a questionnaire, and I interviewed 40 people that didn't go to church to find out why they didn't go to church and what kind of church home they would go to church in if they could find that. And I put together a nice report, and I took it back to the committee. And I'll tell you, Paul Graham is a fair man, and if he sees you doing something, he'll get behind that. And I know it was after that report that Paul started saying, we need to get behind this guy. He's I think one time he said, he's the only one doing anything. Come on, let's get behind him. Or like Sarah said, you were the only one who didn't put a salary on the paperwork when you turned it in. So this is because I would have done this for free. I'm telling you now. So we rocked along a little while, and we had a plan to start, and Tony Salisbury showed up in January of 2000. His very first, or 2001, his very first act as area minister was to sign my very first license as a licensed minister that I'd gotten back in October or August of the year before. And he came to a startup meeting, and we were ready to get a rent space and go, and Tony said, whoa, stop, put on the brakes. He said, you don't have a church planter. And he said, you need a planter. And I sat across the table and I heard him say, it needs to be someone who can write their own schedule. And I thought, that's me. Someone who's a self-starter. That's me. Someone who doesn't require a lot of supervision. That's me. And someone who has a passion for unchurched people. And right then I said, oh, Lord, that's me. Couldn't be. I felt about this big, and I pulled Tom Lyda, who was my pastor, aside, and I said, you know, would it be a waste of time if someone as inexperienced as me were to fill out the paperwork and ask to be the pastor of this new church? And Tom Lyda, you know, these 12 years hung in that question right there. All he had to say was, you know, Doug, that's a great heart you've got, but it never worked. Because other ministers had already said, he's got a great heart, but it's not going to work. And Tom, instead of squashing my dream, he had vision, and he said, yeah, it's what I've been hoping would happen. That's what I've been praying would happen. And I was like, really? And so we took off. Here it started. I went to do a concert in June of 2001 in New Mexico, and while I was gone, Paul and the committee decided they'd call me as the pastor. So I came back, and they said, congratulations, you've got the job. You've been called as the pastor. And I said, really? And then I loaded on a plane and went to Africa. The first people that ever called me pastor were my friends that I made in Kenya. And so I came back, and we started Bible studies, and then Sean and I ended up in Indianapolis, and then we began worship here. And this church grew. It grew because people loved the music, and they came, but it also grew because we knew that music would pull us together, not study because we weren't good at it, but we committed ourselves to growing in study. We committed ourselves to growing in study. And we grew because it was organic. We really didn't grow because we had a great band or great music or because we had a great pastor or a great location. Location was the idea, and people drove here from 4 counties on Sundays to get here because we had passion. Sean said to me one time, he said, I can't wait till Sunday. All week long, all I think about is we get to go to church on Sunday. We grew organically and we grew naturally because we had passion. And we had challenges along the way. And we had a big challenge when we had a huge conflict. And, you know, the church had become a congregation that was known in its identity for reaching out to unchurched people and to people on the fringes. And we had a youth minister who was very, very strong in that area. He was very gifted. And he put together a youth ministry of some 50-something kids. And over time, I'm not really sure how it happened, but all the normal things from burnout, diminishing commitment from leadership, money, we found ourselves in a conflict. And the church that opened its arms to everyone and believed in unconditional love found itself threatened by not one, but a group of members. And leadership pulled together, and we did something unheard of. We actually asked a family to leave. We asked them to leave for a year and to think things over and to possibly come back. But right then it was clear, we want you to leave. It wasn't without a lot of prayer. We tried everything we could think of, but a lot of things couldn't happen, including my own feelings and my own ego. A lot of things couldn't be prayed into submission. And so we did it. And for the next year, we couldn't say open hearts, open arms, open minds, because we didn't believe it anymore. We couldn't say to love unconditionally and accept love from others because we had failed in that charge. So we got together and we made a new mission statement that sounded something like, we are a growing family of faith, inviting all can reach into a living experience with Jesus Christ, listening to each other, caring about our story, and that didn't fit either. Eventually, we came to call that our welcoming statement, and I think it fits. We are a growing family of faith, and we are inviting everyone that we can reach into what we think is a living experience. But the true mission of this church was to allow God to draw everyone that God desires and to do it organically and naturally through our lives, not through something we pretended to be, but through who we are. And who we are people who are struggling to love unconditionally, a people who rely on God for an open heart and open arms. And we are a people who clearly know now not to believe our own press, but to know that it is God, always was God, and always will be God who does this in us and through us. You know, we survived that. Things haven't been the same since then. We've had a lot of empty chairs that have gone in the time that's gone by since then. But I want to tell you what I see right now. There's a new identity emerging. And this is still a congregation that reaches people who are unchurched and still reaches people on the fringes, because it is a safe place for people to come. If they have questions, if they have doubts, this is a safe place. Did you know that I'm going to use the quotation mark, gay congregation in Abilene, Exodus Metropolitan, and I'm doing this because that is not the accurate way to describe an Exodus or a Metropolitan church, okay? But they have a list of congregations. When new people come to Abilene, and some of them are indeed gay people, and when they come to that church, they say, we want you to know that if you don't come to church here, there are a number of churches in Abilene that are safe places for you. And did you know that your congregation is on that list? That they consider us a safe place. That doesn't mean that we've put out front on the sign that we are open and affirming. And I've got a number of reasons why I've never been necessarily in favor of that. I'm not against it either. It's just not our identity. It's not our mission. It's not who we are. We didn't set out to change the way the community thinks about homosexuality in the life of the church. However, we are an inclusive people. And we cannot ask folks to leave based on that. So this is a safe place. It has also become a place, believe it or not, that is so study-oriented, and that our vision is in some of these dynamic Bible studies, and we have a growing reputation. Shannon and I came into a whole new place as teachers with the Enneagram study in this last fall. And now we're starting to offer classes through here that are reaching people from other congregations. We had people from Wiley Baptist and from Unity Christian and all sorts of places that came here to be a part of that study with us. And there's more to come. But I'm going to tell you, a week ago a man asked me, how are things at church? And I said, they're better than they've been in 12 years. And he asked me a really good question. He said, oh, and how is that? And I had to think. Well, let's see, I said. First off is we're smaller. First time I'd ever said that. We're smaller than we were, and it seems to work. It's the first time in 12 years I'd ever been comfortable with the number of people that we actually have. And I said, our finances are pretty good. We don't have a huge budget, but I think it gets a little more reined in every year. But we're meeting budget for the most part, and it's not one or two people doing it, but there's a group of people who are doing it. No one's coming up to me saying, I've been doing too much, I'm doing it all. There seems to be harmony. Wow. And we have a sense of identity, and we know who we are for the first time, and we are not afraid to say it out loud. We are progressive. We are studiers, and we are open to everyone on the fringes. We're a safe place. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And we paid off our building this year, and we're debt-free. I'm going to tell you something. That is why you're going to grow. Oh, not the building part. By the way, this has to be said. We've also grown in stewardship, and it takes time to make new stewards. Studies say it takes 3 to 5 years for a new Christian to bring their finances into compliance with the teachings of Jesus and become tithing members and good stewards to the church. Do you know why it takes 3 to 5 years? The average car loan is 3 to 5 years. So a new Christian may have to pay off some old bills before they can bring their new philosophy and their new set of priorities into compliance with their budget. But hang in there. But don't stop. And just because, here's what has to be said, just because we're burning a mortgage today, don't stop giving. We're not through. Actually, the mortgage payment was around $600 and a few dollars a month, is it? No, not even that. More? $460, yeah. So it's not like we just got back $2,000 a month. We need you to stay committed to the stewardship of this church. The church needs it. You need it. The congregation needs it. And if you haven't done that, consider it now. And I've learned how to talk about it in nice ways like this one. Number one, never compromise your personal budget. Don't do that. In the new year, let's look at things like this. We're here to be a blessing to others. So if you're like me and you're taking out more than you're putting in every year, you need to be on staff. Or we need to talk about that. Number two, when doing surplus giving, never, ever take your Sunday offering and give it to a surplus gift. Because if you put the congregation's budget in peril, we've gone backwards. Now, with all that said, the reason we're going to grow in the next year and 2 years is this. Comfortable, we're happy, and it shows. For a long time, we wanted new members because new members would represent a few new dollars in the offering plate, and we would grow, and we would grow. And as I said, oops, we got the wrong reason for growing, and they saw through us, and they didn't come. But now, they will come. Now they will come because for the first time in many years, this is a place full of happy and committed people. There's fewer of us, but there's harmony here like there's never been before. Oh, and there's also that little thing about sometimes people still stop you on the street and go, you go to that church? Ooh. But I tell you, that church is the one you want to go to. That church is reaching outside some comfort zones. All right. So we're going to do some litany today because on this day we not only celebrate, but we commit ourselves. We commit ourselves to this building, but we commit ourselves to new ministry. And so I've asked 4 people to read, and I want them to come up here and stand in some order and read in just a moment. We have some youth and some adults who are going to lead us in this. And also, this is what we're going to set fire to later. Scott Smith, who's not with us today, Scott and Mona, God bless you. Scott Smith signed this. Patrick Vos was our board chair. He signed it. John Pennington, who represented the area, signed it. And Paula Christensen. Hello, Paula. I know you're listening. Paula signed this as church secretary. Paul and Sarah were there that day. I was there. Thanks to Paul, who wrote a check for, I don't know how much. It was 5 figures to pay off this mortgage back in November, but also who gave us $150,000 when we bought the building to make the mortgage something realistic for us. And so this congregation, it doesn't owe a debt to Paul. Paul doesn't do anything for us asking in return, but we owe identity to Paul. We owe future generations will recognize Paul. As long as I live, Paul Graham and Sarah, you will never be forgotten around here. As long as I live, I promise you that. Never, ever. You people, I still love you. You know that. You already know that. So we're going to set fire to this bad boy in a little bit. But before we do, we have readers. Who's number 1? We are going to use this time of liturgy to rededicate ourselves to this ministry. So please respond as these people lead us.
For the manifestation of your divine love and concern for the welfare of your whole creation. Thank you, God. For the never-ending patience and the continued leadership as expected through the prophecies and chosen leaders of the past.
For the precious gift of your divine Son who died upon the cross so that our people might have life and have it more abundantly. Give thanks, O God. For the church, Christ, the chief cornerstone, for the disciples who waited until filled with the Spirit and were of one heart, one soul, for a church that began to minister to the world.
For the Christian heritage that has come down to us through those who came before us. For the leaders of this congregation, its ministers and lay people, who have been giving themselves generously in stewardship of time, service and gifts to build this church here so. There will be comfort for all who mourn. There will be the strain of wedding marches. There will be the dedication of babies, of small children. There will be the baptism of the penitent. There will be the fresh vision of giving. There will be the anthem sung, where the future has stood as opportunity and has presented a challenge.
For the progress that has made, for the facilities provided wherein we may worship you, come together to study your word, for Christian fellowship, for the opportunity to serve this community and expand our witness to the whole world. For the leadership and guidance that brings us this joyous occasion in which we have completed our financial obligation for these facilities and now symbolically burn this mortgage.
We lift our hearts in praise. And now read with me. We rededicate ourselves in the search for a deeper spiritual experience. Give unto us the spiritual grace to become living stones, upon which our church may continue to grow. Grant that we may become the medium through which all God's children may come to the knowledge of Jesus Christ and accept him as their Savior. Give unto us the assurance of your continued blessing and guidance in the years that lie before us. We ask in Christ's name. Amen. And there we are. Bless you.